Hi everyone. So today I want to be talking about some of the common misconceptions that the general population has about cancer and run through some of the basic science to debunk some of those misconceptions. So, one of the first things that I want to talk about are these conspiracies about one and done treatments, or essentially you take a single pill or get a single injection and that cures your cancer. So I want to run through the basic science of why that isn't actually possible. Now, let's say you have a cancerous tumor somewhere in your abdomen, and this cancerous tumor is made up of trillions of cells. Now, each of these cells is obviously a human cell, and so each of them filled with your stereotypical contents that you would find in a human cell. So the main things I'm going to focus on are your electrolytes, such as potassium, sodium, chloride, calcium, phosphorus, and magnesium are the main ones that I'm thinking of when I'm thinking of electrolytes in the human cell. So let's say that scientists do come up with a treatment for cancer that kills every single cancer cell at the same time. So now you have trillions of cancerous cells that have all died at the same exact time. So what happens to a cell when it dies? Typically, it is going to lyse, or essentially you have the contents of the cell all encapsulated here within the cell membrane, and essentially that cell membrane is going to split open, and all of your contents are now going to spill out. So obviously there's a lot more than all that, but it's all going to spill out into the surrounding area. Now typically, cancerous cells are usually pretty close to a bloodline, whether an artery or vein. Basically, it's a life source for nutrients. So you'll have some kind of bloodline here that it can tap into to pull in nutrients, oxygen, glucose, and such, and then put out waste products and back into the bloodstream to be filtered out. So when these cells lyse, they're going to dump into the surrounding area. A lot of times that's going to go straight into your bloodstream here. So now you have trillions of cells dumping all of these electrolytes back into the bloodstream all at the same time because they all died at the same time from this cancer medication that killed every single cell at the same time. So what's that going to do to the human body? So what's going to happen when you dump all those electrolytes back into the bloodstream? Right? So all of your electrolyte numbers are going to go up, right? Your potassium, your sodium, your chloride, calcium, carbon, your magnesium, your phos are all going to shoot up. So the main two that I would be most concerned with that are really going to mess with the human body and cause harm to our patient are phos. When that goes up, that's going to plug up your kidneys pretty quick. And then particularly the main one that I want to focus on is potassium. So as potassium levels go up, your heart is going to go into what you call an arrhythmia. And essentially what that means is just that your heart isn't going to be beating properly. It's going to be beating irregularly. And so for the most part, most arrhythmias are not sustainable for very long. And so essentially what happens is as that potassium level starts shooting through the roof, that arrhythmia happens, and then eventually the heart is just going to stop beating. So the lethal injection is actually, you can think of it real simplistically as a giant dose of potassium. Because it's always guaranteed to stop the heart from beating. So from that alone, you can see that you can't just kill every single cancer cell within a patient at the same exact time. You can't give a single dose of a medication, whether it be a pill or an injection, and kill every single cancer cell at the same time, because that's what a single dose is going to do, because that's going to shoot your electrolytes through the roof and you can potentially kill the patient. So now that you understand why we can't just give a one and done medication to treat cancer, let's dive into how we actually can target cancer. And so to do that, you need to understand a little bit about human cells and how they operate. So all human cells have receptors on them. As you can see here, they have a specific shape. And that shape essentially says that I'm part of this human. I'm self. I'm not a foreign entity or a foreign cell. And so you have your immune system. There's specific cells that go around and check each cell within the human body to make sure that they are self. And if they determine that they are not, then they will go and kill those specific cells. Now, as you can kind of see here, this is a very crude drawing, obviously, but you can see that right here, the immune cell goes and attaches to a human cell and recognizes that it is self. Now, unfortunately, herein lays the problem with cancer cells, is that the immune system recognizes it as self. And so the immune system never steps in to kill these cancer cells. And so they go undetected and are able to multiply and grow and turn into tumors. On top of there being means outside of the cell to detect a cancerous cell, there's also means within the cell to determine whether the cell could potentially go cancerous. And so within the cell, obviously, you have DNA and you have proteins that go around and check the sequencing on the DNA to make sure it's the appropriate sequencing and to make sure it's not a sequencing that could turn the cell into a cancerous cell that would rapidly multiply. So practically every human has had a cancer cell within them. Luckily, this detection system, though, detected that that cell was going to go cancerous. And what happens is when these proteins detect that, it triggers the cell to perform apoptosis, or essentially, it's a self-destruct button. This is very common. Pretty much every person has had this. So this is actually the same mechanism that a large percentage of miscarriages occur from. So the mother's DNA sequencing proteins determine that the DNA isn't in the proper sequence. And so rather than carry that fetus to full term when it doesn't have a very good shot at surviving outside of the womb, the mother's body self-aborts or miscarries the baby instead. So, if cancer cells are human cells, and they are able to slip past undetected by the immune system and for being cancer cells, and this DNA sequencing failed to do its job, how can we actually target cancer cells? How can we differentiate them from other human cells? If we want to kill cancer cells, how can we only target the cancer cells and not kill the rest of the host cells? So one of the main differences between a cancer cell and a regular human cell is that cancer cell is rapidly dividing and multiplying, right? That's why it's cancerous. And so why don't we target cell division and stop these cells from dividing? And so that's what the old chemotherapy agents do, is they specifically target different sections of the cell cycle in order to prevent cells from dividing. Luckily for us, most adults' cells are no longer in that division state. They're no longer following the cell cycle, and so it is a very good target to target these cancerous cells. The issue, though, is there are some cells that still are in a constant state of cell division. So that's where you get those stereotypical side effects you see from chemotherapy, such as hair loss, since our hair follicles are constantly dividing and multiplying. And that's where you see nausea and vomiting, fairly common. because your GI tract is constantly turning over cells. And so those cells are going to be targeted by this chemotherapy. So, is there a way to specifically target cancer cells then beyond just targeting dividing cells? And luckily, we're advancing to a point where, for specific cancers, we're able to do that. And you're going to be doing what you call genotyping, or essentially figuring out the genes found in these cancer cells that don't occur either at all or as often as they do in the human cells. For example, in breast cancer, some people out there have what's called HER2 positive breast cancer, or that's short for human epidermal growth factor receptor 2. And so, since these patients have that growth factor receptor, we can specifically target it in these patients. However, not every breast cancer patient has that genotype. So, unfortunately, that doesn't work for every single cancer. So that's the issue that we run into, and it's just going to take time to genotype out all of these different cancers and try to figure out what is different about these cancer cells in comparison to normal human cells. And that just takes time and money and research to be able to do. Now, with that, I've covered some of the most common cancer misconceptions that I've run into. And so, hopefully this was helpful, explained a little more for you so you understand a little better about cancer and treatment options for it. So please go ahead and like and subscribe to my channel, and let me know in the comments if there's any other topics that you would like me to cover in a little more in depth and try to break down for everyone. So I hope you're able to learn something from this, and thanks again for watching.